The cast and the crew was, we had the same cameramen, same sound people as we had last season.
A region that surrounds the Appalachian Mountains that apparently has all the creepiest things in the United States.
The Appalachian Mountains have seen their share of mysteries, whispers of creatures in the dark, shadows that move when the wind dies down.
75 yards is exactly the other side of that right-of-way, to where the deer was shot.
But none more heartbreaking than the silence that fell when John Trapper Tice took his final breath. For years, he wasn't just the leader of mountain monsters. He was its heart, its humor, its fire. But behind the laughs, the hunts, and the legends was a man fighting a very real battle of his own. Sit tight as we dive deep into the story of the fearless captain who chased monsters across Appalachia and the heartbreaking tragedy that broke the hearts of everyone who followed him. The man who would become a legend. When news broke in December 2019 that John Trapper Tice had passed away, fans across Appalachia and beyond felt like they'd lost more than just a TV personality. It was as if the mountains themselves had gone quiet for a moment. The laughter, the grit, the larger-than-life presence that had defined mountain monsters suddenly gone. Tributes poured in from across the country, hunters, veterans, and lifelong fans who'd never met him, yet swore they knew him, because in a way, they did. Trapper wasn't just on their screens. He was part of their living rooms, their Friday nights, their folklore. For years, he led his team through the dark heart of Appalachia, chasing creatures most people only whispered about. But behind that fearless leader, behind the rugged face and booming voice, there was a man shaped by something far older than television, a lifetime of hard lessons, earned scars, and a love for the land that raised him. Before there was Trapper, there was just John, a kid from St. Mary's, West Virginia, born in 1947. His childhood unfolded among rolling hills and winding rivers, in a town where everyone knew everyone, and the outdoors wasn't a hobby, it was a way of life. He was the kind of boy who could fix anything with his hands, outrun trouble, and stand his ground when others wouldn't. People said John Tice didn't talk much, but when he did, it mattered. He had that quiet sort of strength that didn't need to announce itself. He loved football, hunting, and anything that tested his endurance. That toughness, mixed with a sharp mind, would later become his signature. But it was Vietnam that carved his steel. Enlisting in the U.S. Air Force in the late 60s, he learned discipline, teamwork, and the kind of courage only chaos can teach. When he came home, he wasn't the same man who'd left. He carried himself differently, eyes older, heart steadier. Friends said you could tell he'd seen things he'd never talk about. But whatever he faced out there only deepened his resolve. And one day that same quiet determination would lead him back into the Appalachian wild, to his roots. The birth of a brotherhood. By the 2000s, most people thought legends of Bigfoot or Mothman were just old campfire tales. But in Appalachia, they were part of something deeper, echoes of ancestry, fear, and faith that tied entire generations to the land. And John Trapper Tice saw that for what it was. Not superstition, but heritage. He wasn't out to mock those stories. He wanted to honor them. So he started reaching out to people who shared that same spark. Men who understood the woods not as outsiders, but as kin. That's how the Appalachian Investigators of Mysterious Sightings, or AIMS, was born. Each member brought a different strength to the table. Buck, the tech-savvy tracker with endless curiosity. Huckleberry, the loyal right-hand man who treated every mission like a calling. Wild Bill, the comic relief with a knack for turning chaos into laughter. Jeff, the researcher and believer in every detail. And Willie, the trap master whose contraptions looked half mad, but somehow always worked. Together, they formed more than a team. They became a family. Trapper wasn't just the leader. He was the anchor. He gave the group a direction beyond, let's find monsters. For him, it was about preserving the Appalachian identity, proving that the culture and the stories of the mountains were as real and as worth fighting for as any physical creature they might be chasing. Nights in the woods blurred into early mornings, filled with laughter, debates, and the kind of silence only broken by distant rustling in the trees. They built traps, swapped theories, and chased shadows. But under Trapper's command, every chase had meaning. He often said, half smiling, "If it's out there, boys, we'll find it." And somehow, they believed him every single time. What started as a local hobby would soon explode into something much bigger, and none of them were ready for how far it would take them. Into the Woods, the rise of mountain monsters. When Mountain Monsters premiered in 2013, few expected that a scrappy team of Appalachian hunters would steal the spotlight from sleek, city-based reality shows. But within weeks, Trapper Tice and his crew became the talk of the Travel Channel. It wasn't because of fancy production or over-the-top effects. It was because viewers believed them. There was something authentic about watching 6 rugged men wade through fog-drenched valleys, arguing over clues one minute and belly-laughing the next. Trapper stood at the center of it all, calm, commanding, never needing to shout to be heard. His gravel-toned voice carried both authority and reassurance. When he said, "All right, boys, here's what we're gonna do," you leaned closer to the screen. Each episode followed the same rhythm. A mysterious sighting, an investigation, a midnight stakeout. Yet it never felt repetitive. The team's chemistry made even the simplest moments electric. Whether they were tracking the Wampus Beast, the Mothman, or the Grassman, you could feel the tension and thrill through their banter. And beneath the action was something deeper, a sense that this wasn't just entertainment. Trapper treated every story, every legend, as a thread of Appalachian identity. Something sacred that deserved to be explored, not mocked. His leadership style was equal parts fatherly patience and military precision. Viewers connected with him instantly. To fans, he was more than a TV personality. He was the voice of the working-class outdoorsman, witty, honest, and unpretentious. As the show's fame skyrocketed, Trapper handled the spotlight the way he handled everything else, quietly and with a hint of mischief. But even as new fans poured in and ratings soared, those close to him could sense he was carrying more than anyone realized. The hunts were getting tougher, the travel more grueling, and the long nights were taking their toll. Still, the captain pressed on, always steady, always leading. The team might not have known it yet, but the man who'd taught them to face monsters in the dark was fighting one of his own, one that couldn't be trapped or tracked. The hunt beyond the monsters. As Mountain Monsters entered its later seasons, something subtle began to shift. The team still built their elaborate traps and chased shadows through the Appalachian night, but Trapper's focus seemed to widen beyond the hunt. The man who once charged headfirst into every mission began to look at the bigger picture, not just the creatures in the woods, but the stories behind them, and the people who kept those stories alive. He often said that what they were really doing wasn't monster hunting, it was storytelling. The Mothman, the Wolfman, the Grassman, these were mirrors of Appalachian fears and hopes, living symbols of the region's mystery. For Trapper, keeping those legends alive was a way of keeping his culture alive too. But the years in the field were wearing on him. Fans might not have noticed it immediately, but his crew did. The endless night shoots, the treks through knee-deep mud, the cold rain that seeped through every layer, it all started to take a toll on his body. He'd laugh it off, joking that he was just getting his oil changed a little more often these days, but his eyes told another story. Still, he never let fatigue break his rhythm. When morale dipped, Trapper was the one who brought it back up, cracking a joke, offering a word of encouragement, or reminding the crew why they were out there in the first place. He became the emotional center of the show, grounding it in warmth and authenticity, even as his physical strength waned. Behind the scenes, his health was beginning to falter, though few knew the extent of it. Yet there was never talk of quitting. For Trapper, slowing down wasn't an option. Not when there were still stories left to tell, and brothers who looked to him for guidance. In many ways, these years weren't about chasing monsters anymore. They were about facing time itself, that quiet, relentless force none of us can trap or escape. And somewhere deep down, Trapper probably knew his toughest battle was still ahead. The battle within, Trapper's fight with illness. By 2015, fans had come to see Trapper as untouchable, a man who could wrestle the wild itself into submission. But behind the camera, the fiercest fight of his life had just begun. And this time, the enemy wasn't hiding in the Appalachian woods. It was inside him. A routine checkup turned into a reality check when doctors discovered a blood clot that had caused serious complications. His kidneys were failing. Most people would have been devastated. Trapper? He just smirked and called it an oil change 2 or 3 times a week. That was him. Humor as armor, laughter as defiance. Still, those who knew him best could see the cracks. Long shooting days became harder, recovery slower. He'd limp through scenes, wave it off, and insist on finishing the job. The man who never backed down from anything now faced something he couldn't out-hunt or outsmart. Fans noticed subtle changes, a little less screen time, a little more fatigue, but the spark was still there. Every time he appeared, that trademark grit radiated through the screen. When he spoke, his team listened. When he smiled, they believed things would be okay. Because if Trapper was still fighting, how could they not? But there's a certain silence that creeps in when a storm's coming. Huckleberry later said they all felt it, that unspoken worry. None of them dared say it aloud, maybe because saying it would make it real. And so Trapper fought in his own way, quietly, stubbornly, with that same old-school pride that had carried him through war and wilderness. But this time, the battlefield wasn't the forest. It was his own body. And though the outcome was uncertain, one thing never changed. Trapper Tice wasn't built to surrender. Stepping back, not giving up. As Mountain Monsters rolled into its later seasons, fans began noticing something strange, a growing emptiness where Trapper used to be. Sometimes he'd show up for a quick strategy talk, a smile, maybe a joke. Other times his chair stayed empty, the team speaking of him with a quiet reverence that said more than words ever could. Online, speculation ran wild. Was Trapper okay? Would he return next season? The crew stayed tight-lipped. No gossip, no statements, just respect. That's how Ames operated. Loyalty first, questions later. Behind the scenes, though, the Brotherhood remained unbroken. They visited him whenever they could, called him to share updates about new hunts, and kept him in the loop on every strange encounter they chased. And Trapper, even hooked up to medical machines, still had advice to give. He'd listen to their plans, chuckle, and say, "Nah, boys, you'll scare it off doing it that way." The general was still commanding his troops, just from a different kind of war room. He may have been stepping back, but he never once stepped away. His fingerprints were still all over the show. The traps, the strategies, the way the team handled each case. It was all vintage Trapper. Fans could sense that connection. Even when he wasn't on screen, his spirit filled every frame. The show wasn't just about monsters anymore. It was about legacy, about a man whose influence refused to fade. But time was moving, slow and steady. And though the Ames crew held out hope for a comeback, deep down, they knew this story was building towards something they couldn't stop. And when that moment finally came, it hit harder than anyone expected. The day the news broke, December 16th, 2019. It was a cold morning in Appalachia when the news began to spread, first in whispers, then in headlines, then in heartbreak. John Trapper Tice had passed away at 72 after a brief illness. For fans, it didn't seem real. How could it? The man who had laughed in the face of danger, who'd led hunts through the darkest woods, was suddenly gone. On social media, messages poured in, thousands of them. Some wrote about how he reminded them of their own fathers or grandfathers. Others thanked him for giving voice to Appalachian culture, for showing that the people of those hills were thinkers, builders, and storytellers, not stereotypes. The Travel Channel released a short statement offering condolences, but the real tribute came from the fans and the Ames team. Buck, Huckleberry, Wild Bill, they went silent. For days, not a word. They were grieving not a co-star, but their leader, their friend, their family. It's strange how a television figure can feel so personal to people. But Trapper had that power. He was the kind of man who made millions feel like they knew him. And in a sense, they did. He was one of them. For Appalachia, his death felt like the closing of a chapter, the kind of story that didn't end neatly but lingered. And yet, even in loss, there was something left. Something that would soon bring the team and the fans together one more time. The Letter and the Legacy. When Mountain Monsters returned for its 7th season, something was different. The laughter was softer. The air felt heavier. The team gathered not in anticipation of a new hunt, but to honor the man who'd started it all. In the opening moments of that season, an empty chair sat where Trapper once did, his old cap resting on it like a silent salute. Then, one of the crew members pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a letter from Trapper himself, written before he passed. His words were simple, raw, and unmistakably him. Keep the Brotherhood alive. Keep the adventure going. As each member read a line, their voices cracked, smiles breaking through tears. Fans watching at home felt it too. The weight of goodbye mixed with the warmth of gratitude. That moment wasn't about monsters or mystery anymore. It was about family, about finishing what he started. The episode became more than a tribute. It was a reminder that some legacies don't fade, they echo. Every future hunt, every laugh shared in those misty Appalachian woods, carried a bit of Trapper with it. Even after the cameras stopped rolling, his presence lingered, in the way the team spoke about him, in the fans who still write his name, in the mountains that now hold one more legend in their stories. Because in the end, Trapper's final legacy wasn't about what he found out there in the wilderness. It was about what he left behind in the hearts of everyone who followed him into it. The spirit of the hunt. After Trapper's passing, Mountain Monsters carried on. But anyone who had followed the show from the start could feel it in their bones that something fundamental had shifted. The traps were still being set, the radios still crackled with excitement, and the same smoky campfires burned in the Appalachian night. Yet there was a certain silence beneath it all, a pause in every laugh, a weight that hung in the air whenever the crew mentioned his name. The men weren't just chasing creatures anymore. They were chasing a connection, a way to keep his spirit alive in the same hills that had raised him. Each investigation became more than an episode. It became a tribute. Buck often quoted Trapper's old sayings. Huckleberry would chuckle about how the old man would have scolded them for missing a track, and Wild Bill kept the humor alive because that's exactly what Trapper would have wanted. Even the way they moved through the woods felt different. Slower, more deliberate, as if they were listening for his voice between the rustling of leaves. Fans picked up on it almost immediately. The show had softened around the edges, taking on a tone that was less about chasing shadows and more about honoring the man who'd made those hunts matter in the first place. The laughter was still there, but now it came with a quiet respect, a kind of reverence that only comes when someone truly unforgettable is gone. Viewers often said it felt like Trapper's presence lingered in every frame, in the mist rolling off the mountains, in the team's camaraderie, in every whispered, "Let's do this for the old man." Because when someone like John Tice leaves this world, he doesn't really go. His energy stays in the people he shaped, in the land he loved, in the stories that continue to be told. And for those who had stood beside him, that wasn't enough. They wanted to take what he built and carry it forward in a way that would make him proud. Sons of Appalachia, carrying the flame. In the years after Trapper's death, something remarkable happened. The men he'd mentored decided his story wasn't over yet. Buck, Huckleberry, and Wild Bill came together with a mission that felt both inevitable and deeply personal. They called it Sons of Appalachia, a project that wasn't just about monsters or myths, but about preserving the soul of the mountains themselves. For them, this wasn't simply a show. It was a continuation of everything Trapper had stood for. The idea was simple, yet powerful. Explore Appalachian heritage, celebrate its folklore, and pass down the wisdom of the land to the next generation. They wanted to keep alive the culture that Trapper had represented so effortlessly, the mix of grit, humor, and honor that defined people from these hills. Every time they set out into the wilderness, they said they could feel him there, walking with them, steadying their resolve. They'd recall his voice reminding them to stay sharp, his knack for blending skepticism with wonder, and his insistence that no matter what you were chasing, you respected the land you were standing on. And in a way, Sons of Appalachia wasn't just a tribute, it was an evolution. Trapper's lessons had turned into a living blueprint, guiding not only his friends, but a new wave of explorers, storytellers, and believers who wanted to honor the mysteries of Appalachia without losing touch with its roots. It proved something profound. Legends don't disappear. They multiply through the people who carry their fire forward. The torch had been passed, not with ceremony or applause, but with quiet determination. And just like Trapper, they didn't seek fame. They sought truth, community, and a deeper connection to the wild heart of the mountains. The heart of the mountains. Maybe that's the thing about legends. They never really die. They just change form. John Trapper. Tice was never just the leader of mountain monsters. He was the heartbeat of an entire generation of mountain folk who saw themselves reflected in his grit, humor, and unshakable authenticity. He wasn't trying to be larger than life. He simply was. Those who knew him best said the man you saw on television was only a glimpse of who he truly was. His son once put it perfectly. The man you saw on TV pales in comparison to the father we knew. And somehow, that truth made the public version of Trapper even more powerful. Because what you saw on screen, that calm leadership, that quiet strength, wasn't an act. It was a reflection of a life lived with purpose and humility. The tributes that poured in after his death weren't just condolences, they were thank yous. Thousands of fans from across the country, hunters, farmers, veterans, and everyday folks, wrote about how he'd inspired them to believe in something again. Some said he made them proud to be from Appalachia. Others said he reminded them that courage isn't about the absence of fear, but about showing up no matter how tough the road gets. And maybe that's why his loss hit so hard. He left behind a space too vast for anyone else to fill. His spirit lingers not as a memory, but as a living presence, steady, eternal, and unmistakably Appalachian. So maybe the real tragedy of John Trapper Tice wasn't just that he left too soon. Maybe it's that the world rarely sees men like him anymore. Men who live with heart, fight with purpose, and inspire others to believe in something bigger than themselves. If you listen closely, out there in the dark where the mountains meet the sky, you might just hear that familiar voice again. Calm, certain, saying, "Keep the hunt alive, boys. The story's not over yet." What's your favorite Tapper moment from Mountain Monsters? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.